Hello there, Parth Sharma this side, bringing you chess classics, in which I'm covering top 15 games played by Vishwanathan Anand, aka Vishy. So far, our countdown has reached till number 3, and with Sergei Karyakin against Vishwanathan Anand, that game in Vaikanze 2006, where Anand sacrificed two minor pieces to get, I would say, a raging initiative towards White's queen side, stood at number 3. The question was, which game would be at number 2? Because there were only two spots left, or I should say, two slots left to decide which would stand at number 2. And this was probably one of my favorite games of Vishwanathan Anand, and it's spectacular game. His game against Lautier from Biel Credit Suisse tournament in 1997. And here Anand is white because you can see the orientation of the board is towards white, and Lautier is playing black. So without further ado, let's jump onto the game. Anand plays one e4 and Lautier plays Scandinavian defense. And this is all main line. The intention knight c3 attacks the queen and develops to the tempo, so queen goes to a5, a square at which this queen cannot get tortured basically. And now white continues his traditional development on the queen side, d4, knight f6, knight to f3, c6, and the position somewhat transforms into a Caro-Kann kind of structure. Because after bishop to c4, bishop to f5, this is all seen in Caro-Kann structures, but the point being queen on a5 rather than on d8. Also, this knight developed on c3, and usually in Caro-Kann with no d pawn for black, this knight is always, I should say, in many cases tends to be on e4 or rather at g3. So Anand plays knight to e5, and it's quite evident that Anand had studied about Scandinavian, because in game 14 in World Chess Championship match against Garry Kasparov in 1995, Kasparov was playing white and played almost a similar kind of structure against Anand, and the position was double-edged, but in the end Kasparov got through under time pressure at time controls. Anand blundered, and after that Kasparov said that it was not a fair win for me because there was a lot of noise which was distracting both players, and it was quite evident that even Anand in those crunch moments during the game got distracted and couldn't concentrate even with having very less time. So it was quite evident that it wasn't a fair win, but nevertheless that game was left behind and we were in 1997. So at e6 was played by Lautier, and by the way, in that game Kasparov was white and Anand was black, and game did continue like that, but knight e5 was surely there. And now pawn to g4. So now white is chasing this bishop, since this bishop is somewhat locked in this diagonal with pawn being played to e6. Main idea was to stop any devastation on f7, so e6 was forced, and now pawn to g4, not from here, from here, attacking this bishop and forcing it to move. Bishop to g6, and now h4. So white is chasing this bishop desperately. So Lautier plays knight b to d7 first, and after knight takes comes h5. Bishop to e4 is forced, the knight cannot take because of the pin, and now rook is attacked. Well, it looks like that castling kingside will be prudent, but the problem is that white has already pushed his kingside pawns way too deep, and after this castling happens, chances are that black can also castle queenside, and that rook on d8 will be shooting down towards this white queen. And that can be a little bit frustrating for white because you are basically castling directly into the danger and with these two pawns already advanced, this king would stand exposed, and bishop controlling this diagonal, things can turn very nasty indeed for white. So Anand logically looking at the situation that castling might not be a better option, he plays rook to h3, and this was, I think, probably a little bit unexpected, and Lautier felt challenged by this move rook to h3. So it was, I would say, it would have been only fair to play bishop to d5 just to get rid of this bishop, but after bishop d5, bishop will tuck back to d3, and it would be very difficult to see how black would be able to attack then in that case. So Lautier felt a little bit challenged in this position and plays bishop to g2 attacking the rook. He was probably expecting rook to d3 and tucking this bishop to d5 then, but now comes this idea rook to e3, totally unexpected. Normally this rook will go to g3, but here Anand plays rook to e3, and probably the best for black would be to just castle or to just play queen to c7. Knight b6 isn't, I would say, a bad move. It's a decent move, and if the bishop is attacked, if bishop goes to b3, then black would simply castle here and would reach a decent position. Bishop to d3 being played, but he can still castle it, but then he goes for this another ambitious move. So Lautier was playing very daring chess, very ambitious, looking at this knight, because this knight is pinned, it cannot take it, so putting more pressure on the pinned piece. And now a very critical decision for Anand to make. The rook is attacked, the knight is attacked. Now Anand comes up with this beautiful idea, pawn to f3, and this bishop is trapped. But black still has a lot of compensation for that. The rook is en prise, as you can see, but this knight is also en prise, and this knight is pinned, already highlighted. And by taking this knight, black can actually get the pawn and get the second pawn on d4 as well. And if black succeeds to, let's say, castle, and the position can be double-edged because this bishop is a little bit trapped and doing absolutely nothing. So an ambitious chess, daring chess, probably would take Lautier into very deep waters. And here I thought that he might play queen to c7. I mean, if I had been in this case, he should have played queen to c7 in that case. Maybe the position would still have been better for white, nevertheless. But he goes bishop to b4, now challenging Anand. And now this is a massive threat indeed. And also this knight is looking at this rook here. So things can get very awry in this case, because this knight is pinned, it cannot move. The rook is en prise, and very tough decisions to make. And here Anand plays king to f2. I would say shooting two birds with one bullet. And if knight takes, then bishop takes, and this bishop being trapped, white would have two minor pieces for a rook. That should be okay to hold the ground, or I should say hold the ground. But Lautier goes for the simplification. Bishop takes, pawn takes, queen takes c3. Still no time to take this extra piece. Rook to b1, queen takes d4. Again, if you take, then knight takes e3 actually wins. So it's prudent to take the pawn on b7. And here probably the best move should have been to play bishop to h3 for black, because this rook is pinned, it ain't going anywhere. Knight can simply take that rook off, and in a good world, if this queen is protected, black can castle as well. But Lautier goes for rook to d8, inviting superb combination of moves. I will give you some time, take a pause and think what Anand played in this position. Well, if you found it out, that's brilliant. And if you just want to enjoy the show, h6 is very nice. These were Anand's comments when he looked at this game. And h6 indeed is very nice. This has a very deep tactical point that I would be showing you. Well, h6 was played, and the best move here to play is to play knight takes e3. But obviously it doesn't help because this wins a tempi. The queen has to move, and once queen moves, king takes g2 is on the cards. Queen to e5, because if king takes, then queen can take the bishop. And queen g1, this bishop is totally gone because after king takes f2, the queen would be protecting that bishop. So knight takes e3, well worth considering in this position. Lautier took the pawn on h6, and I will again give you some time, take a pause and think the spectacular move that Anand played in this position. Well, if you found it out, that's awesome. And if you just want to really get overjoyed by the move that Anand played, bishop g6, boom! Free queen on d1, two pawns attacking the bishop. Let's see what happens if queen takes d1. And this is actually mate in 4 by force. Rook takes e6 check, knight to e7, rook e to e7 check, king to f8, bishop takes h6 check, king to g8, and bishop takes f7 is checkmate. Superb move, bishop to g6. And you might be thinking that here Anand played h6. Well, he can play this incredible queen sacrifice now as well, bishop to g6. And the idea was bishop h6, but here white can execute the idea of bishop to a3. This must have been a question that might arise in your head, and very valid question indeed. But here is the problem. After queen takes queen, rook takes e6 check, all are the same, but the problem is after king f8, bishop to a3 check, black has the saving knight e7. Now after rook e7, this is not check, then queen d4 check, and black wins. So that's the problem. h6, very important. And by the way, I should say, here in this position, instead of rook e to e7, if bishop takes, then king can actually escape in this position, and this won't be mate because the king will simply take the bishop. So after rook d8, h6 was very important. Another question, why does black have to take the pawn anyway? He can simply play pawn to g6, and that can be okay, because now this bishop h6 thing might not come. But here's the trick, white would simply play bishop takes g6 anyway, and after queen takes d1, this is not mate in 4, but this is mate in 6, and this is by force mate in 6, because rook takes e6 check, king to f8, rook takes f7 check, a key move in this position, big key move, because let's say after king f8, if you go bishop to a3 check, I'm afraid this doesn't work, because after knight e7 and we go to same story, the king will gobble up the bishop because that bishop isn't defended by the rook. So after king f8, very important to take with this rook on f7. And after king g8, this is the point of h6. Rook g7 check. The pawn protects the rook on g7, and after king f8, there is no defense after bishop a3. Knight e7 will run into bishop takes e7 checkmate. Superb combination of moves. As it turned out, Lautier took and bishop to g6. And here Lautier played knight to e7. What happens after, let's say, knight takes rook? But then comes bishop takes f7 check, king f8, exchange the queens, and white actually wins the tempo because the bishop is attacking the rook, and the king is attacking the bishop. One of them moves, one of them drops. And let's say after bishop to g6, if he plays queen to f6, looks very tempting indeed. But bishop takes f7 check is a killer move. Queen takes f7, rook takes f7, knight takes e3, queen just tucks aside to e2, and if king takes, then bishop takes knight. And this bishop is trapped. So after bishop g6, knight to e7 played by Lautier. And now this simplifies the game. Queen takes d4, rook takes d4, rook to d3, pawn takes, the rook is en prise, rook to d8, rook takes d8 check, king takes d8, and bishop d3 was the final move of the game. Lautier resigned the game. This bishop is totally helpless. Black can try to play bishop to h1, but I'm afraid after bishop to b2, winning the tempo, attacking the rook. So rook comes to e8 and bishop to f6. Actually, the knight is pinned, and white will simply play bishop e4, protecting the pawn, and king to g1, and king takes bishop. As it turned out, bishop to d3 was the final move, and here Lautier resigned the game. Superb game by Rishi Anand. Probably one of my favorites, especially that bishop to g6 move. Well, how many of us would play a move like that, or even h6 for that matter, to look for h6 and making a sense out of this, to make bishop g6, bishop a3, bishop h6 work. It was very, I would say, very deep calculation. Brilliant game indeed, and deservedly so. It stands at number 2. Tomorrow I'll be looking at Rishi Anand's greatest game that he has ever played. So stay tuned for tomorrow. Thanks for watching. Stay safe. Cheers. Bye.